I don't think anyone will disagree that weightlifters have some of the most aesthetic squats in history. The grace, the depth they reach, and often the lack of equipment used while squatting leaves many of us in awe when we want to learn how to squat. This picture right here of Pisarenko is literally one of the reasons I started weightlifting. As time progressed, I saw videos of Liu Xiaojian, Tian Tao, Toshiki Yamamoto, and thought to myself, I need to get there. And I did. Here's 300 kilos. But today, I want to help you get there. I want to help you squat in the most graceful and productive way for your weightlifting. Because yes, we could start low barring it and absolutely good morning the weight up. And it might give us some benefit to our weightlifting. But one of the reasons we are doing weightlifting is part of expression of grace and beauty in our movement. And thankfully for us, oftentimes the prettiest squat is the one that's most productive for weightlifting. So look, when it comes to squatting like the best, we need the best possible mobility we can manage. This is the foundation of the Olympic style squat, and as such, we need to perfect it. Mobility is varied and there's a lot of different things we could do, and there's lots of different ways we can go about improving our mobility. But for the sake of this video, let's narrow it down to two really useful movements that we can focus on that give you the biggest bang for your buck. Now, when it comes to mobility for the lower body, we're gonna go super simple and we're going with some weighted pause squats. Now, the weighted pause squats is incredibly useful because it's incredibly specific to the movement we want. I want you to load up a reasonably light barbell and stay there for as long as feels comfortable. However, if the weighted pause squat feels uncomfortable, I want you to shift to the supported pause squat and spend lots of time here until you can work up to a weighted pause squat. When we're in the unsupported pause squat, I want you to move around a lot, find lots of these corners, and ensure that we're getting every possible bit of mobility that we can get out of this exercise. However, if you're comfortable with the weighted pause squat, I want you to spend quite a bit of time down here 2 or 3 times a week before your squat sessions until things feel really comfortable. Now, obviously, if something starts hurting, don't do it. And if it feels sore after too long, stop doing it. Oh, that's the one. Next up, we're going super simple, straightforward. We need to hit 2 areas for the upper body. We need pecs and thoracic for a beautiful high bar squat. I want you to get blocks or a foam roller on the bench, feet on the floor, choose an appropriate weight, not too heavy, and then very slowly, I want you to bring the weight overhead until you feel a stretch. And spend a little bit of time here, accumulate a couple of minutes until you feel looseness. Now you can do this once or twice a week before your squats. Now, let's move on to the technique of the high bar squat for weightlifting. The first style we're going to look at is the classic knees forward over the toes. This style of squat is when we're sitting as upright as possible. We're driving the knees forward over our toes. As we hit the bottom, we're trying to keep our hips close to our heels. And as I stand up, I'm pushing my knees forward, all the while trying to keep my chest upright and some extension in my back. This is the classic weightlifter style of squat that we all know and love and does heavily rely on that mobility. We're generally assuming a shoulder width or inside shoulder width stance, slightly toes turned out, and a grip that's closer to our shoulders than further away. Now, this style of squat heavily relies on that dorsiflexion, my ability for my knee to go over my toes. One ways we can kind of help compensate for this is that slightly turned out position. This helps us use a little bit more internal rotation of the hips to get the knees further forward. So even if you have incredibly good dorsiflexion, if you've good ankle mobility, it still helps if we turn the toes out because this brings the hips in a little bit closer, but still lets us get some great quad drive coming up out of the bottom. Now let's look at some common cues and troubleshoot some issues that people often have when using this style of squat. The first one is people will often let the hips drift back just a little bit as they begin squatting down. This inadvertently changes our torso angle to a style that we don't want and adds some forward momentum to that torso angle, which isn't going to be good for the weightlifting style squat. You need to exclusively think about pushing those knees forward as you squat down. Now, a second issue people often mistake is when they come up out of the bottom, instead of driving their knees forward, they'll send their knees back and we'll see that shin angle revert to perpendicular too fast. This again tips the torso forward and kills our high bar squat. What I want you to think around parallel is when I'm here, I'm driving the knees forward and I'm trying to keep the hips in over my heels. The further back they get here, the less we can use the quad drive. Now you might think that's the only style of squat we're going over today, but that is absolutely not the case. There's a second way we can squat like weightlifters that's still aesthetic, that's still pretty, and it still works incredibly productive for your weightlifting. This style of squat uses a little bit more ass. Let's call this style of squat the balance squat. This style of squat squat uses a bit more balance between anterior and posterior when we're squatting, and a lot of great weightlifters and weightlifting teams squat in this regard. Most notably, the Koreans squat this fashion, the South Korean weightlifting team, and if you're watching their videos, you might have noticed this. Other notable teams like the Germans or the Ukrainians also squat like this. Now, let's go over to the technique of this second type of squat. So when we went over the first type of squat, we exclusively thought about pushing our knees forward as we squat down. For the second side of squat, we're going to shift some of that focus to the hips. As I squat down, instead of exclusively pushing my knees forward, I'm also going to think about sending my hips back as I squat down. And then when I squat up, I'm still keeping tension on my hips and driving my knees forward. So see the difference? When I'm doing a regular high bar squat, I think knees forward over the heels. When I do the second style of squat, I think knees forward and hips back at the same time. This style of squat allows us to get a little bit more of the posterior involved in the squat as we send those hips back. This lengthens the glutes a little bit and puts a little bit more load on the back. Now, let's troubleshoot some of the common errors and places you need to focus on when you're using the Korean style of squat. What often happens here is when people learn to do this style of squat, they'll shift their hips back too much and forget to drive the knees forward. Remember, we don't want the disjointed time between the knees and hips. The knees and hips break at the same time as we descend through the squat. Don't let the hips shift back without the knees coming forward, because when you shift the hips too far back at the bottom, you'll end up good morning the squat when you stand up. So what a lot of people do is actually slightly break at the hips before they start, get a little extension in their lower back, and then begin the squat, and this helps keep that emphasis nicely distributed between the hips and the knees. Now, if we compare our Korean style squat to our first style of squat, we generally have the option to stand a little bit wider here. So when we came to the first one, we typically didn't want to be much wider than shoulder width, but in some cases, when we do that second type of squat, we can actually shift just a little bit wider depending on your build. This little bit hip dominant still allows us to get a nice depth, and it feels a little bit more comfortable for some people if they're using that second side of squat. So a lot of times when you're a taller lifter, you might hear this information and think, oh, the second type of squat is for me. I don't have that mobility or leverages for the first side of squat. This is incorrect. So if we watch the second side of squat in a longer femored lifter who has an unfavorable build, you'll see that the distance from the hips to the heels is even greater. We need the taller lifter to focus on the knees forward even more. Now, those pesky, well-built squatters can do either type depending on what suits them better, but for the taller gentleman or lady, it's knees forward all the way, baby. Now, on to the fun part and the really important part that I need you to promise me you will do. Before we go on, you need to say out loud, I promise I will do my assistance exercises. If you try and perfect these techniques, perform these styles of squat without having the necessary foundation and base of good, strong positions, you won't be able to effectively do these squats. So you have got to do your assistance exercises. And first up, we're starting with a classic single leg exercise. So this is a variation specifically that we want for the high bar squat, and that is a front foot elevated split squat. I'm exclusively focusing on driving my knees over my toes as much as possible. We'll weight this up with dumbbells or barbells, and we're doing this once to twice a week, and we're really focusing on that forward knee drive. You can even wear your weightlifting shoes when you're doing it. The reason we're specifically doing a single leg exercise here is that we really want to emphasize that forward knee travel. Now, there's lots of great assistance exercises that we could use for the high bar squat, and we kind of do use them in our programs. However, in this particular scenario, I really want you to focus on that forward knee drive in the split squat, and this front foot elevated split squat is absolutely perfect for that. On top of that, it always pays to hedge your bets to do some unilateral exercises when you're in a largely bilateral sport like weightlifting. So if the split squat is one of the goats of the lower body, the barbell row or some kind of row is one of the best exercises that we can do for a pretty strong, beautiful, upright high bar squat. Now, I personally hate barbell rows, but that doesn't mean they're not a good exercise. We can do multiple different sizes of row. We can do really upright ones just to the hip. We can go down below the knee. We can go down to the floor. We can do some pendlay rows from the floor. Whatever it is, get some kind of row in your training. Do it consistently. You can do 45-degree seal rows. You can do cable rows. Just do something that's heavy, high volume twice a week, because it's crucial for a good quality high bar squat. The high bar squat is one of my favorite lifts in all of strength training, and it's probably a lot of your favorites too. So give it the respect it deserves, give it the time and practice it needs, and you will reap the rewards of a great quality squat. Now, if you need a squat program, we have several on the Seek a Strength app, and we have the GOAT of squat programs. It's somewhat infamous for how difficult the game can be at certain points, that is a Road to Anywhere Part 1. Now also on the app, exclusive to the app, is the Road to Anywhere Part 2 squat program. Both are 2 sessions per week, and there's also a squat maintenance program you can run after. The app adjusts your weights if you run into issues. We've had something like 10,000 plus squat PBs from the squat program, so I guess you could say it works pretty well. There's also a front squat program on the app, as well as a multitude of other great weightlifting and strength training related programs. That's at app.seekerstrength.com. At the moment, you can get the first 2 months on a discount. If you head to the link below, you can reap the rewards of that. Give it a couple of months on the Seeker Strength app and you will not look back. You also have access to chat to Dara, I, or Callum on the Seeker Strength team, direct to coach chat Monday through Friday. We'll endeavor to get back to your questions and queries and problems as fast as possible, so don't forget to check it out. About €1 per day, and it's well worth the money.